This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
A fragment of a milk bowl dropped at a major city in ancient Canaan 3,400 years ago may help to change the understanding that secular archaeologists and scholars have about the history of the Israelites. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Joining me tonight is a gentleman who's become a friend of ours. He is an archaeologist and an epigrapher, one who studies ancient language and can decipher it. He has decoded a scrap from a piece of ancient pottery, and his new article, published by Associates for Biblical Research in their publication Bible and Spade, the Lachish Milk Bowl Ostracon, a Hebrew inscription for Joshua's conquest at Lachish. He's the author of books that we recommend, The World's Oldest Alphabet and Origins of the Hebrews. We're honored to welcome back to the program Dr. Douglas Petrovich. Doug, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hello, Derek. Thank you. It's great to be with you.
We really enjoyed, Sharon and me, when you were visiting us here in the Ozarks. We had the opportunity to talk about your book, Origins of the Hebrews, which is a really exciting and encouraging book for Christians and for Jews, I would think, because it documents corroborates the history that we're given in the Bible. This little fragment of this milk bowl seems to add another piece to that puzzle. What is it, and why is this so significant?
Sure. And so it's a small potsherd, only about this size, really, and it has Hebrew writing on it, and it was found at a site, the site of Lachish, which is one of the cities mentioned in the book of Joshua in the king list of the cities that the Israelites under Joshua conquered. And it says that it took them 2 days to conquer this city, and the reason is because it's such a large city in contrast to a lot of the other cities that they conquered. Jericho was really small, Ai was small, quite a number of the cities of the conquest were small. But they also describe the conquest of Lachish. And this is in the Shvelah, which means the foothills. So it's between the coastal plain where, for example, later fame, that's where the Philistines are. They're on the coastal plain with their chariots and whatnot, and the central mountain spawn. So this buffer zone, if you will, is where this very strategic site was located. And it essentially acted as a guard post, that kind of a city, so that anyone in the hill country, maybe if there's a kingdom up there or there are city-states, they can be protected on the southern flank and their southwestern flank by this city. So at this powerful, massive Canaanite city of the late Bronze Age, the late Bronze Age 1, at the time that the site was destroyed near the end of late Bronze 1B, which is getting close to 1400 BC, all of a sudden, there's this destruction at the city wall on the western side of the site, where the wall goes north and south, and about halfway down is this area known as Area S, where archaeologists excavated in 2018, and they put out their report in 2021 mentioning this inscription. And they didn't translate the middle of three words, but the top and the bottom word, servant or slave, and then honey, they did translate.
So the servant in charge of the honey was or is that the contribution that you made in completing the translation?
Yeah, exactly. And so I knew that the second word, which is off to the right and a little bit high on the ostracon, if you were to look at it right in front of you, it was broken off a little bit, the letters, those two letters. There's part of each letter that's broken off, but it's not a significant amount. There's still a good 2/3 of each of the letters there. So it's a very easy, plausible reconstruction of the parts of those two letters that's missing. For whatever reason, the excavators in their epigrapher, his name is Miskov, an Israeli scholar, they didn't attempt to translate that second word, which really helps to be able to get the meaning of the entire inscription. So servant in charge of honey is the proper translation.
So you say this dates to the late Bronze Age 1B, and according to your article, that's 1484 to about 1400 BC. What, other than the dating, which corresponds to the biblical dating of the conquest of Canaan, about 1406 BC. What connects this to Joshua and the Israelites?
Sure. So a couple things. First of all, the milk bowl itself it's a specific kind of ceramic type known as white slip 2, Roman numeral 2. And what we know from archaeology, looking at various sites that have such milk bowls of the type 1 variety and the type 2 variety and other similar pottery or pottery that's discernible from period to period, we know that the white slip 2 milk bowl only shows up in the record in late Bronze Age 1B. It becomes more predominant in late Bronze Age 2, especially 2A, the next archaeological period. So from 1400 to roughly 1300 BC is when it becomes more popular. But it's located in a place where all of the other material there, including the radiocarbon evidence that comes from there, because it was found resting on top of an ash layer, and they tested that for carbon-14 remains, and that range of the dates makes the last half of the 15th century BC the right time period for the organic remains, which helps to date more concretely the timing of the ostracon and its manufacturing and the writing of the inscription. And essentially, the milk bowl exists without writing on it, in this case and in most cases. And then when it's used and broken and all of a sudden shattered into pieces, somebody finds a piece laying around, and he or she picks it up and decides to write on it. So that's exactly what would have happened. It becomes an ostracon. So the radiocarbon evidence confirms the timing of this, and that fits together with biblical chronology. Biblical chronology, carefully and literally interpreted, would have us take a position that the conquest under Joshua took place at the end of the 15th century, specifically 1406 to 1400 BC. And you know what, Derek? Oddly enough, this milk bowl fragment with a Hebrew writing on it fits perfectly according to the biblical narrative and the chronology in the Bible. So, am I surprised? No. But it's a really powerful tool to clue us in to identify these specifically as Hebrews as opposed to anyone else.
You go into some detail on the process by which this was carbon dated, including some of the recalibration that needs to be done when you get older than 1400 BC. I think a lot of Christians, especially those of us who've looked at the evidence for Darwinian evolution and found that beyond microevolution, the idea that one species becomes another, the evidence is lacking. We've heard that carbon-14 isn't really reliable. How accurate is that, and what process has to be done when you're analyzing a find like this? How do you determine that this is accurate? What sort of recalibration do you need to make, and why do you need to make it when you get beyond 1400 BC?
Sure. And I understand, Derek, where the thinking comes from within the Christian community that says, because of the fact that radiocarbon evidence suggests that the Earth and mankind and animal life, etc., is much older than the roughly 7,000, a little over 7, in my view, a little over 7,000 years of age, because the radiocarbon dating suggests that it's much older than that. What we do is in a way that's not thinking as much as we should. We tend to dismiss radiocarbon evidence altogether. Carte blanche, we just throw it out the window. That's not a scientific approach. And what we found as a result in the world of archaeology or as a result of the finds that have been made that can be dated with radiocarbon evidence and would date to a certain time period that we know of in biblical history or biblical chronology that would make it clear and distinct that this is a date we can rely on, we've found that the evidence matches up. For example, there's organic evidence that was found within the plastering of the walls of Hezekiah's tunnel that was built by Hezekiah and his forces when they knew that Sennacherib, the king of the Neo-Assyrians, was coming to destroy Jerusalem, and he wanted to reroute the water source so that water could go into the city of Jerusalem underground. So they dug this channel through the limestone and connected it, and they dug it from both ends and connected it. And an archaeologist within the last 20, 25 years, whatever it was, found that the plaster used, because you would have to plaster the limestone so that the water would not seep through, right? Mm-hmm. They found organic material, so they saw it inside the plaster, so they carved it out and they radiocarbon dated it. And it carbon dated to the range where the median point is around 700 BC. Well, according to biblical chronology, 701 BC is when Hezekiah did all of this activity. So it fits perfectly. And then we go back further, 1000 BC. I wrote an article about the site Kibbutz Kaiafa. You can download it for free from my academia.edu webpage. And I argued that that is a site built by Saul, where the Israelites in their army would have been stationed. It was a fortress. It was more like an outpost, a military outpost. At the time of David and Goliath incident, the Israelites, they weren't in tents anywhere. That's silly. So all the flannel graphs from Sunday school, they're wrong. The Philistines would have attacked them in 40 days. They wouldn't just sit around and wait. They would attack a bunch of people in tents. Mm-hmm. No, they were in the fortress of Kaiafa, which had city walls and sat atop the Elah Valley looking down on it. And so the Israelites would have retreated into there so that the attack, wouldn't have worked if the Philistines came after them in their holdup.
Right. Okay. Mm.
So that site was occupied for a brief time. The archaeologists who excavated under Joseph Garfinkel, they said 25 to 30 years is the life cycle of the site at that time, which is great because it gives us a really narrow window to work with. And everything's confined to a small period of time, and you can't really goof it up too much. Well, there's radiocarbon material there. There's organic material that can be radiocarbon dated, both for the life cycle of the site and the destruction of the site specifically. They know in areas where it was destroyed. And there, the organic evidence has as its median date 988. Well, according to biblical chronology, pretty much a perfect time for David, for under the kingship of David, for the site to be destroyed during the Philistine wars that are spoken about in the Bible between David and the Philistines, and actually probably when David's off fighting another people, the Ammonites or somebody else. Everybody was, keeping him occupied with battles. But the Philistines would have come in probably in a time when David was in another theater, and they destroyed this city. They came up from the plain, destroyed the city, and probably tried to make a charge toward the hill country. Well, that's a 2-year difference, right? Just like with the Hezekiah's tunnel, 1 year difference in the ideal. This is a 2-year difference in the ideal. So what that shows us is that in two completely different periods, 300 years apart, we have radiocarbon evidence and biblical chronology in one, and then radiocarbon evidence and biblical chronology in the other, that they fit tightly, perfectly. So that suggests to me we would be fools as Christians to simply dismiss radiocarbon evidence. It would be a mistake. But once you start going back before 1400 BC, and this, Derek, is noticed not by Christian scholars, but by non-Christian scholars, you can't match the time period of what you know that exact date or that very close range of time would be. You can't match the dating, what's called the historical archaeological dating, with the carbon-14 evidence dating. It starts to become off, so that the carbon-14 evidence suggests I'm older. As you go back in time, older. And there's a curve. So the further you go back in time from 1400, the further apart they are. That should tell us a lot. And again, this is not a bunch of Christians standing up and saying, we want this to be true, and so we're demanding that this is true to fit our narrative. It's not like that. It's not like that at all. This is what's very true and observable and consistently found with the material. So as archaeologists, we have to, work within a system of integrity. And the integrity suggests that we have to account somehow for this offset in the radiocarbon dating. And I think, frankly, that biblical history is the only answer. There's no other answer for this. And it has everything to do with how you read about in the biblical narrative in the book of Genesis, that from the period of the flood down to Moses, you have a gradual lessening of the lifespans of the people, right? Mm-hmm. How is that happening? Well, remember, before the flood, God promises that as a result of judgment, after the flood, at some point, he doesn't state when this is going to begin, but he says, as for mankind, his life will be 120 years. That is a prediction that because God is not going to put up with 969-year-old people anymore and their kind of continuous perpetual sin, he's going to lessen the lifespans. But he chooses, seemingly, according to the numbers in the Bible, to do it gradually over time. And what do you know, Derek? But the same time oddity, the same shortening moves both with the lifespans of mankind and with this what later becomes a standard of radiocarbon decay. Mm-hmm. So that in our present world, radiocarbon decay is at a constant rate. So it seems from the evidence that rate is constant going back from today all the way back to 1400 BC. And then once we hit 1400 BC, it begins to exponentially go off the charts. So something different was going on in the world from the time of the flood to 1400 BC. Very clearly, something unusual is going on. My theory, and I'm not the only one who subscribes to it, is that something was happening with the relationship between the magnetosphere that protects the Earth from the sun and its damaging radioactive rays and so forth, that a change in that relationship between the magnetosphere and us and the atmosphere, that kind of change is something God could have brought about slowly over time as the Earth was recovering from the devastating effects of the catastrophic changes that took place on Earth at the time of the flood and then just after. And the things that we read about in science books, ice ages and these kinds of things, these are all phenomena that you'd expect if the Earth is in the midst of recovering from this massive change in all the conditions. So this, I think, Derek, is the only way to be able to justify how things happen the way they do in the biblical record and in the archaeological record.
I've had some conversations with a physicist who tried to explain his research into this phenomenon, and I need to go back to it and try to actually cipher it out. But it's right at the edge of my ability to grasp. But as I understand it, essentially, when you go back far enough, there's a difference between atomic age, the speed at which we physically age, and the number of cycles around the sun. In other words, a solar year is not the same amount of time today as it was then. And there's some research that suggests that even the speed of light is slowing down. Time may be slowing down. This again gets way beyond my ability to understand, but we love this kind of stuff, which is why Sharon and I have been doing Sci Friday since 2016, where we snuck it in on Tom Horn without letting him know we were going to do it, and thankfully he thought it was pretty cool. But coming back to the Ostracon and the significance here of the script, how does it differ from modern Hebrew, and what does it show you as an epigrapher?
Sure. Differs from modern Hebrew in that, and actually, if we can talk about modern Hebrew for a minute, essentially, Derek, modern Hebrew, as we look at it, as we write it, has been the same ever since the Israelites, or the Judites, if you will, mainly Judites, but there would have been some Israelites in there, when they came out of the Babylonian captivity, right, at the decree of Cyrus, and then there were several waves of deportees that, post-exilics who returned to the land of promise. From that time on, they adopted this script that we know of as block letters, Hebrew block letters, and it came from Aramaic. So they borrowed the Aramaic script, and they actually adapted or adopted the Aramaic language as what eventually became their common speaking language. By the time of Jesus, it's 100%, ingrained now in the Jewish people that they're speaking Aramaic, not Hebrew. So the script is the same from the 5th century BC until today. It's the same. But before that, it's from the earliest that we know of, and this is recorded in my first book, The World's Oldest Alphabet. The oldest form of letter we have goes back to 1842 BC, in the lifetime of Joseph, when Ephraim and Manasseh, his sons, are living at Avaris, and that's because Jacob, of course, stole them from their parents and moved them to where their uncles were. And they, of course, look around and say, hey, uncles, where's your script? And, how do you write Hebrew? And their uncle said, well, we have no way of writing Hebrew. Well, Ephraim and Manasseh are born and raised in Egypt. Their father's the vizier, so they're at the top of the food chain. And they would have been taught the writing of Hebrew, of Egyptian hieroglyphics. So they would have put one and one together and said, we can take 22 hieroglyphs and turn them into the letters for our alphabet and create a user-friendly alphabet script for our people, our Hebrew people, so we can finally write our own works and history and whatever we want to write. And that's what happens. And so it starts as hieroglyphics. And if you look at any picture of hieroglyphics, you see that it's pristine drawing. My artistic acumen pretty much ended at about second grade. That's
you and me both.
Yeah. It doesn't get any better, that second grade level. But for a lot of people, they just increased in their skill. And so you would have had scribes who had the skill to draw immaculately with hieroglyphs. Well, when the Israelites adopted this, remember, it's kind of like Mel Gibson said in Patriot, just a bunch of farmers with pitchforks, right? So the Israelites, they're just herders with goats and sheep. So they're not scribes in the royal court. So when they write the same type of drawing as the hieroglyphs, they're not pretty. They're kind of ugly. But all you need is for someone to know what you're drawing, right? That's all you need. I can draw a helicopter. It is not pretty, but anyone will tell you that's a helicopter when I'm done drawing it. Mm-hmm. So that's what happened. And then over time, Derek, from 1842 BC, the earliest attested letter, until the Exodus in 1446, we have, during that period, various inscriptions that demonstrate over that period of time, that roughly 400 years, that the script evolves, if you will. It becomes less and less pictographic and more abstract, which is exactly what you would expect. And that being the case, the way it evolves from the beginning until the Exodus, and we have an inscription that dates to the very year of the Exodus, that's Sinai 361, it's in my World's Oldest Alphabet book, deciphered and discussed at great depth and with great acumen. At that time, where the script is and how it looks, then if you were to take that picture and then move ahead 40, 50 years in time, how's it going to look? Well, exactly as you would expect is the way the letters are written in the Lachish Milk Bowl Ostracon. In fact, there is an intermediary form for one letter. It's the letter Pei, which means it's the P sound, and in Hebrew it means mouth. And beforehand it was like a football in that it was this oval with points on the end, right? Just like an eye is shaped. But they actually, the Hebrews actually had the same letter type for the eye and the mouth, and sometimes context had to tell you which one it is, and sometimes there was a pupil that they would distinguish with, which is nice to help you out as the reader. But if it's a pei, it's always, in the pre-Exodus period, it's always this football-shaped letter. Then later in history, it's an angle. It's a slope and then an almost straight line, but just a little bit bowed below with that point in the angle. So it's a fragment of the I, the E-Y-E-I. And so what you have with the Lachish Milk Bowl Ostracon is most of the letters look like the letters looked at the time of the Exodus, except this pei, sorry, not the I, but the mouth. The mouth looks like it does in the inscriptions that follow this, in the period of the rest of the Late Bronze Age and the Iron Age, so the period of the Judges and into the monarchy of Saul and David and Solomon. So this is exactly what we'd expect, Derek, for in that 40, 50 years of time between the Exodus and the conquest of Canaan, for there to be some kind of small change that would happen in the writing of the language. And here it is, in the writing of a mouth, going from this to about that much of a half of it. And that essentially cements the connection between the Hebrew before the Exodus and the Hebrew during the period of the Judges. It's perfect. It's the ideal look that we'd expect from letters.
Now, the Sinai inscription you mentioned that was written, dated to the year of the Exodus, Sinai 366, is that?
61.
361. Okay, just making a note because I just want to look it up for my own curiosity. Need to get a copy of your first book. So what we're looking at then is the gradual transition from a modified Egyptian hieroglyphic text dating to the 19th century BC to what was found and dated to the year that Lachish was destroyed by Joshua and the Israelites, 1406 BC. The gradual transformation of the early form of this text to sort of is it accurate to call it Proto-Hebrew or Paleo-Hebrew script?
Yeah, it's difficult to know how to call it, Derek, because scholars have always thought that the Hebrew script only goes back to 1000 BC or maybe 1200 BC at the oldest. And so that was always called Paleo-Hebrew. And it wasn't until, in the 1920s, German scholar Hubert Grimme came along and said, the world's oldest alphabetic script is Hebrew. And of course, nobody believed him, but he didn't have all of the letters worked out. So he kind of made some wild translations and transcriptions of it. So it wasn't precise until, and my work built on all the scholarship from his day until now. And then I made some refinements and was able to identify those letters correctly. But only after that did it kind of all come together to a point where we can, with confidence, understand exactly what it would have looked like.
Scholars have been telling us that the Israelites just emerged from the native Canaanite population, that the whole backstory of the sojourn in Egypt was just made up to give Israel a really awesome backstory. This is who we are, without any evidence. Your books, The World's Oldest Alphabet and Origins of the Hebrews, combined with this, seems to me really blows that out of the water. Is that overstating it?
No, that's cut and dry, and that's why there's so much pushback, so much opposition, even from the believing community, because most Christian scholars, seminary professors, Bible college and university professors, have kind of bought the thinking and the ideology, hook, line, and sinker, that we can't date our history back before 1200 BC. We can't identify Israelites as any older than that. And it's kind of put us in this framework, and we're mice in a wheel just spinning over and over and over, and we don't allow ourselves to get out of that wheel and look at new possibilities. So that's why the opposition is so strong. But yeah, This is a complete paradigm shift, saying now we have evidence that goes all the way back to the 19th century BC. And it confirms a literal rendering of biblical history according to the chronology that's in the Bible, from the passages in 1 Kings and Exodus that give us clear, concrete chronological moments in time. It affirms those in every case, taken literally.
The archaeology conference we attended last September, the International Symposium on Archaeology and the Bible in Albuquerque, we were surprised to find so many non-Christians there who are in the field of biblical archaeology. Just made us wonder, why are you here if you don't believe that the Bible is an accurate representation of history? But there they were, and whether they wanted to admit it or not, in one degree or another, their work was confirming the historical record in the Bible, which is not primarily a historical book, but the history that's in there over and over again is proven to be accurate. With your research, what kind of avenues of attack have the skeptics been taking to try to discredit the world's oldest alphabet, origins of the Hebrews, and this new article?
Mm-hmm. Well, a number of lines of attack. One being the accusation that we have nothing to substantiate that the world's oldest alphabet that everybody admits is Semitic, and almost everybody admits that it derives from hieroglyphs. So almost everybody's on the same page there. But to be able to narrow it down as to which Semitic-speaking people are behind this script, that's another question. And they try to find ways to kind of create doubt, to say we don't really know it's Hebrew. But the greatest response to that is that there are 5 words that are found in Hebrew that are never found in any other Semitic language that we've known of yet. And those are documented in the book. And on my website, my academia.edu website, I have a response to criticisms from scholars. And I point out those words and I say, the proof's in the pudding. Show me these words in any other non-Hebrew Semitic language. And they can't, they won't. And nobody's responded to my rebuttal, right? So it's all about pushing this to the nth degree and dealing with their arguments as two people trying to win an argument were. And really, there's a lot riding on this, because if they can undermine our view of the history in the Bible, and we start looking at our Bible and say, there are flaws in here that we can't do anything about, and the historians have pointed them out, and we just have to capitulate. What comes next? What comes next is, if I can't trust the historical message in the Bible, why would I be able to trust the spiritual message in the Bible? Because it's not properly recording what happened in time and space. So if that's true, how can I believe that Abraham attempted to sacrifice his son by faith, and he believed that he was going to kill his son and God was going to resurrect him from the dead? Because this was the son of promise that God spoke of. Mm-hmm. So God would have to resurrect him from the dead. Abraham believed that. That's why he was going to kill his
And that would not have been that would not have been a very unusual worldview in that place and time in ancient Canaan, mm-hmm. with the veneration of the Rephaim being a central part of the Amorite culture, the Amorite worldview in Abraham's day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, everything is riding on the historicity that's in the Bible. We've got to maintain it. We've got to protect it. The word apologetics is used. That's a defense. We have to defend to the umpteenth degree, Derek. We have to defend the historicity of the Bible, because Amen. People's faith and trust in the Word of God and in God Himself, in many cases, is riding on it.
Amen. Well, talking about history, you suggest a timeline of events that might have led to this this piece of this milk bowl being left behind at Lachish. How is it possible? What plausible scenario can you develop where this ceramic calling card or business card for the servant in charge of the honey winds up lying on top of the destruction layer at Lachish for 3,400 years until it's discovered in 2018, and then just coming to public attention now within the last 6-8 months?
Yeah, great question. And it's something I had to think through, right? When I realized the significance of the find, and I came to a correct understanding of the translation, I had to figure out how that would look, how that would work. And I think it works like this. When the Israelite army would have gone from city to city to attack, they would have dealt with everything else that every army of history has had to deal with. You have to have enough weapons. You have to have enough defensive armor. You have to have enough food and water, supplies, ability to carry and move things, so carts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So as part of that would be the food supply. And as they came into Canaan, once they conquered Joshua, a city that they were not allowed to take the spoils from except gold, silver, and metals that would be given over to God in the tabernacle, they couldn't take anything. But once they came to Ai and conquered that city and all of the subsequent cities, it's now fair game. So what they capture is theirs. And this was harvest season when they attacked. We know this from the narrative with Joshua. So, and sure enough, the archaeologists who dug there, Garstang, the two British scholars, Garstang in the 30s and then Kathleen Kenyon in the 50s, they both discovered huge storage jars filled with grain that showed that the captors of the city, they didn't take the grain to eat, which is really stupid, humanly speaking. But they were under the ban, the Israelites.
Right.
That's why there was grain. So picture now other cities that they conquer. What do? You take all the grain. You take all of the wine. You take all of the weapons and the supplies. And if they happen to have a supply of honey at that site, you take the honey. And what do you do when you get all of these things? Well, it's easy. Joshua would have said, okay, I'm going to put Nathaniel in charge of wine. I'm going to put Miriam in charge of, the wheat. And then I'm going to pick this guy and put him in charge of the honey. So every time we capture honey, this guy will collect it and he'll take it on his cart and it will follow the train, wherever the army goes. And so this guy would have had a title from Joshua or whomever, and his title was servant or servant over or in charge of honey. And so when they then got to the site of Lachish, which is recorded in Joshua 10, they would have conquered the city, and it says they conquered it on the second day, not the first day, like Eglon, the next city on the itinerary, because of the size of Lachish. So they would have penetrated through the walls, and it's described that they killed every man, woman, and child there in Joshua 10. That being the case, picture this. Somehow God helps them to penetrate the city walls, which is no small task, as we know from the Jericho narrative. They get in the city. Maybe it takes a little bit of burning things at the gates or the points of penetration, and then they go in the city and they systematically find every person and kill them, which is not pleasant to talk about or think about, but they did it, and just as God instructed, and that's the bottom line. And then on their way out, this servant in charge of honey, he would have had in his back pocket, as it were, this ostracon that had his title on it. And maybe in the middle of it was an initial as an abbreviation of his name. It was an N, as in Nathaniel or Nathan or Nachash or whatever. And so he either purposefully or accidentally would have dropped. And we know this, Derek, it was found in a room of a house that was connected with a common wall to the city wall. It's known as Building 100 by the archaeologists. And Building 100, not on the floor level was the ostracon found, but there was some debris on top of the floor level, and then there was an ash layer, and then there was the Ostracon laying on top of it, and then there was the fill on top of that, which is the fill for the last occupational phase of the Late Bronze Age 1B, which was more like a squatter's town. They didn't use the city wall at that point. So it was a thoroughgoing destruction that they couldn't make the city what it was before right away. But on top of that ash layer is this Ostracon. So it shows that they and the archaeologist's photo and drawing reflects a breach in the wall just opposite the city wall, a breach in the city wall, just opposite the find spot for the Ostracon, which tells us that this is one of the points at which the attackers, whether they're Israelite or Martian, they went through the wall at this point. And so on the way back out, the servant in charge of honey would have dropped his milk bowl Ostracon right on top of the ash of the 24 hours ago or 12 hours ago or 5 hours ago or whatever, burnt material, and proceeded out of the city, and the Israelites don't return. And then it's covered up with fill for that final squatter's occupation. So that's how it seems to work out.
It just occurred to me as we were talking, because the destruction of Lachish was part of Joshua's southern campaign against the Amorite kings, the 5 Amorite kings who came north and laid siege to Gibeon, and they called for Joshua to help. They were the Horites or the Hivites who had deceived them by wearing old clothes and old wineskins, and let's make a treaty with you. And the Amorite kings from the south came up to attack them because that was a strategic location. If the Israelites were in control of it, it cuts the Amorite city-states in half in Israel. The king of Lachish was one of them, named Yarmouth. The king of Yarmouth was one of the others. Anyway, it struck me that this servant in charge of the honey may well have been present and witnessed the sun standing still in the valley of Ajalon. And this Ostracon might have been there when that miracle happened. This is a piece of history that connects to that one of the most astonishing miracles in the Bible, where Joshua prayed, sun stand still at Gibeon and moon in the valley of Ajalon, which is really significant because the sun, Shemesh in Hebrew, and the moon god, Yarik in Amorite, Sin in Akkadian, were major deities for the Amorites. And for them to suddenly be stopped in their tracks by Yahweh, the God of Israel, and for this Ostracon to connect to that event, this gives me goosebumps.
Sure. And that's right. That's all part of the narrative of what's happening, the events, blow by blow.
This is amazing. This is some fantastic detective work, Doug, and we are happy to try to spread the word here, because we firmly believe that as more comes out of the ground, as more is deciphered from these pieces and texts, the Bible will be confirmed to an even greater degree. And we love the fact that skeptics who claim to bleeping love science, when the science turns around and says, oh, by the way, the science says that this text that you ridicule is actually correct. It's fun watching the cognitive dissonance and how it takes effect.
It is fun. And they become very quiet when that happens. Since my new book has come out, Derek, with my first book, there was a ton of opposition, a ton of people attempting to discredit the work and the conclusions in it. But with my second book, so far, it's been extremely quiet. And what does that tell you? It tells you we have no way of refuting what it is that you're presenting. It's such a strong case that we're better off just pretending like it doesn't exist and not giving you the airtime to be able to let people know about it, because we can't refute it.
Right.
So it's fun when you see the impact that this has on the skeptics who they want to dismiss your work, dismiss your connections with the Bible, dismiss your your affirmation of biblical historicity in places, because it grates against what they use inside them to rationalize away the validity of the Bible. Because if they were to accept that and accept the existence of God, all of a sudden there are now moral issues in their hearts and lives that they would have to deal with because of acquiescing to God's presence. So all they can do is do everything possible to push that away, sear their consciences, and make sure that evidence can't penetrate their shields. But when they have no words to speak and they're left silent, that for me is very satisfying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a phaser blast right on the shields. Shields are at 30% and failing. Your work at Hatzor, your work here at Lachish, two of the cities destroyed by Joshua, and your research, your academic peer-reviewed papers on these have helped establish that the narrative in the book of Joshua, the book of Judges, are correct. Sharon and I, in our weekly Bible study just last week, as we're recording this, went through the story of, 2 weeks ago, went through the story of Deborah and Barak. And we've been to this site called El Ahwat today in the Bible, Harosheth Hagoyim, which was the headquarters of the Canaanite general Sisera, but he was likely a Sardinian mercenary. It's not a coincidence that his name, Sisera, is very similar to the name of a regional capital on the island of Sardinia, Sassari. That is just some really intriguing stuff. The evidence is there, and it's just exciting to be alive in a time when the rocks are crying out, in a sense, just as Jesus said they would. So, Doug, we really appreciate your work. Happy to direct people to it. And we will put a link to your page at academia.edu in the notes. It's also been on the screen here as people have been watching this video, but it'll be in the notes whether you're listening to this at YouTube, VFTB.net, or wherever. Doug, thanks very much for taking your time, and thank you for your work. We really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Derek. And I'll just say in passing before I go, since you mentioned my first book, it's now back in print. In case anybody's interested in getting a copy of the world's oldest alphabet, you can buy a copy from the publisher, Carta in Jerusalem, for $84 and then shipping. Or I now have copies, and I don't know how long they will last. Until they last, I will sell them. But I have I bought my own number from the publisher, and I have them here at my house. So if you want a copy from me, I'll be glad to sign it for you. I'll sell them for $60 and then shipping. So if you go to my Twitter account, you can see the what do you call the tweet that's
the pinned
that's at the top?
tweet?
The pinned. Yeah, my pinned tweet. You click it, and it'll give you information how to contact me and how to pay for it. And I'll be glad to send you that. Or my new book, Origins of the Hebrews. I'll sell you a copy of that for $40 too, if you're interested. Fantastic,
because we've been getting some emails after your appearance on the Bible's Greatest Mysteries about Origins of the Hebrews. But I'll put a link to your Twitter feed in the notes as well, so that people can get the world's oldest alphabet. And I'll be hitting that link here as soon as we're done. Check the show notes at VFTB.net, youtube.com/Gilbert House. That's our new location on YouTube or wherever else you're watching this to get the link for Doug Petrovich's page at academia.edu. We'll also put a link in there to where it links to where you can find his books. Highly recommended. And coming up, we're going to talk about a couple of changes as far as conferences are concerned. One has dropped, but another one has been added to our upcoming schedule. We'll talk about the situation in Russia and Ukraine, and Putin's Rasputin as A View from the Bunker continues. talking the walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You find us online at VFTB.net. That's what we call our global media hub. You'll find us on social media at View from Bunker. That's on Twitter, of course, or at Derek Gilbert. Facebook, the View from the Bunker page is there. Give us a like, and you'll find us also at Gab Me We Get Her Parlor, at Derek P. Gilbert, and on YouTube. The new address for our YouTube channel is youtube.com/Gilbert House. All one word, youtube.com/Gilbert House. Subscribe and share with your friends as we try to get a little more active with getting these videos out there. A couple of things to talk about. Again, a couple of changes in our conference schedule to coming up to tell you about. But first, want to comment just a little bit on Russia and Ukraine. This story ongoing now since last December, at least in our consciousness, but this has been ongoing for many, many years as the Russian government, Vladimir Putin in particular, has made clear to the West that if NATO continued to try to expand right up to Russia's borders, there would be a reckoning. Now, I want to say again up front, I'm not carrying any water for Vladimir Putin. Responsibility for the thousands of deaths, both Russian and Ukrainian, and the displacement of millions of Ukrainians from their homes lies squarely on Vladimir Putin. However, had the West taken him seriously and said, maybe let's just say, okay, look, we understand that having an unfriendly state on your border is a problem. Certainly, we reacted with vigor in resisting the idea of Russian nuclear missiles in Cuba back in 1962. We weren't very happy when Germany made overtures to Mexico during World War I. So it shouldn't be a surprise to us when the Russians respond badly to the idea of a NATO-aligned nation or a NATO nation on its border, especially Ukraine, because Russia was invaded twice through Ukraine in the 20th century. World War I, World War II. That was the route, the invasion route, taken by Germany. So you can understand why they'd be just a little ouchy about that. Now, given the starvation of millions of Ukrainians in the 1930s under Joseph Stalin, you can understand why many in Ukraine, especially Western Ukraine, wouldn't be too happy about being under Russia's thumb. But twice in the last 20 years, the United States has backed rebellions in Ukraine that have toppled a pro-Russian government. Pro-Russian presidents thrown out in 2004 and again in 2014, the Orange Revolution and the Maidan Revolution, both backed by globalists, especially here in the United States. I don't know that there's a good side here in this fight. And I think I'm trying to be reasonable here in my commentary, and my spidey sense is that that's correct because I'm getting flack from those who want to see Vladimir Putin as the good guy and those who, like me, were raised in an America where the Soviet Union was the epitome of evil, the evil empire. And so everything that Russia does is bad. The truth is somewhere in the middle. There are some who want to defend Vladimir Putin and the invasion as somehow standing up to the globalists. I'm not sure that Putin is as anti-globalist as you'd like to think he is. Yes, there are biolaboratories in Ukraine that we don't really know enough about to know exactly what they were doing. But I'd feel a little more confident in believing that Putin's motives about going after biolabs were genuine if Russia were also dismantling its own bioweapons laboratories. And for the record, we have them here in the United States, too. The one thing we can agree on is that this has been a real hardship on literally millions of people. And sadly, there are those who are taking advantage of this and exploiting it. There were some refugees who showed up in Ireland this past week, it was reported, who claimed to be Ukrainian because the EU has lifted restrictions. Basically, they're kind of waving Ukrainian refugees in. And a couple of men showed up in Dublin at the airport who, shall we say, just did not look Ukrainian. They did not look Slavic. shall we say. And besides which, they both appear to be in their 30s. And right now in Ukraine, if you're between the ages of 18 and 60, you are not supposed to leave the country. You're supposed to stay and fight by law. So these guys who look to be considerably younger than retirement age were saying, no, we're totally 60, yeah. And they're doing this to take advantage of measures to help actual Ukrainians who are actually suffering because they've actually been forced to leave their homes because of the ongoing shelling. A tragic story this past week about a zoo in eastern Ukraine that's going to have to put down thousands of animals, including some large animals, big cats, bears, because the zoo had been shelled. And in some cases, in the bears in particular, their enclosure had been damaged and there was danger of the animals escaping, but there's no way to get them to safety from a city that's surrounded by Russian troops. So it's a tragic, tragic story. One bizarre aspect of this story that the major media is not really touching on, although I've seen a few stories in corporate media sites, but and to be honest with you, I don't watch much of the talking heads on cable news because that's pretty much all propaganda. When I do watch it, it's to find out what they want me to think. There's a political thinker who's really more of a mystic than a politician or geopolitical analyst who seems to have a lot of influence with Putin's thinking. He's been called Putin's Rasputin. His name is Alexander Dugin, and he's best known for a theory that I guess you could call neo-Eurasianism. It's based on an older philosophy called Eurasianism, which emerged after the collapse of the Russian Empire in 1917, which calls for Russia to look to the legacy of Genghis Khan to create a greater Russo-Eurasian state that covers everything from Vladivostok to Dublin. Control of the world island, in other words, because whoever controls the world island controls the world. Dugin wrote a book in 1997 called Foundations of Geopolitics. Very ultra-nationalist. Russia should look out for itself first. It's being described as neo-fascist and neo-Eurasianist. Again, this idea that Russia should control Europe and Asia, that massive world island, because by so doing, it would become the world's leading power. He divides the world into land powers and sea powers, and Dugin says that as the world's leading land power, because by land mass, Russia is the world's largest nation, it should become exert its divine right to control all of that world island. But taken even farther, Dugin bases this on a belief in 19th century occultist teachings from like Helena Blavatsky on Atlantis and Hyperborea. This goes back to Greek mythology, which was revived in the 19th century by the likes of Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley and so on. In a nutshell, Dugin believes that modern Russians are the descendants of the Hyperboreans who need to stand up and resist the evil descendants of Atlantis, which would be we Americans. So that is Dugin. What's curious is that his book contains a symbol on the cover, like an 8-pointed star, and I'll drop this in here so you can see what I'm talking about. This is the symbol of chaos magic. Chaos magic, which is a development, an outgrowth of the Ptolemaic magic system developed by Aleister Crowley in the early 20th century. So, yeah, there you go. What's behind this? Chaos is Leviathan of the Bible, the primordial state that had to be subdued by God in order to create the world as we know it, a habitable place for humanity. This would seem to explain some of the apparent contradictions in Dugin's worldview. He's not really looking for a new world order. He's looking for a new world disorder, it would seem. What's even more bizarre is that that's 8-pointed chaos magic symbol is really just a modern development of the 8-pointed star, which is a representation of the ancient Sumerian goddess of sex and war, Inanna, the god of this age. Israel is entering a new interesting era. This past Wednesday, the chairwoman of the coalition headed up by Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid decided she was going to withdraw from the majority coalition, which had 61 seats out of the 121 in the Knesset. So by leaving the majority coalition, Bennett's coalition now has a minority, 60 to 61. So could this be a path for the return of Benjamin Netanyahu to power? It is possible. What's even more interesting is that this dispute was caused by unleavened bread. Seriously. The young woman's name, Silman. What is her first name? Here, Edith Silman. She was upset at a ruling or a directive from Nitzan Horowitz, who's the acting minister of health, who ordered hospitals in Israel to allow patients and visitors to bring leavened food into hospitals during the 8 days of Passover, which is coming up. Silman is an observant Jew and found it very offensive that Horowitz, who is from the left-wing Meretz party and is openly gay, would direct the hospitals to allow something they consider a sin during the Passover, leavened bread, into the hospitals. So this, it's not surprising that this coalition is crumbling because you've got left-wing groups, right-wing groups, and the Arab parties all gathered together, held together only by their mutual dislike of Benjamin Netanyahu. So it was not likely this was going to stick around, that was going to hold together for very long, but it's interesting that this is coming together, or falling apart rather, over the issue of leavened bread and unleavened bread during the Passover. Now, interestingly, a Kabbalistic rabbi, Lazer Brody, cited a Kabbalistic text, a commentary on the Zohar, that when a mixed multitude takes over the government in the land of Israel, it is a sure sign the Moshiach, the Messiah, is imminent. Now, we don't give any credence to the Kabbalah or its text. I just shared that so you have an understanding of where some of those Kabbalistic-leaning mystics in Israel are going. And they do have some influence there. So that's kind of what's interesting. Also very interesting here in the United States that the corporate media is finally paying attention to Hunter Biden's laptop, the so-called laptop from hell. If you're watching this program, it's likely that you're aware that the New York Post reported on the laptop from hell prior to the election, October of 2020. They put the story out there, and anyone who commented on it, acknowledged its existence even, was deplatformed from social media. Even mainstream reporters and talking heads who criticized the New York Post for publishing the story were slammed on social media for calling attention to it. We were supposed to pretend that it didn't exist, and if you did admit that it existed, that it was just all Russian disinformation. But in the last 3 weeks, New York Times, Washington Post, CBS News, USA Today, other corporate media outlets have admitted, that is a thing. And yes, the Internal Revenue Service and other law enforcement agencies are looking into Hunter Biden's taxes based on the business dealings detailed in the emails contained on that laptop. Now, if you've not heard the story, he abandoned the laptop at a repair shop in Delaware. And so the owner, after waiting for him to pick it up for a certain length of time that was specified in the repair contract, he decided to, look and see what was on the hard drive that he'd repaired, and was shocked at what he found. Tried to hand it over to law enforcement. The FBI has been sitting on it since, 2019. Rudy Giuliani got a copy of it. He passed it on to Jack Maxey. Maxey was the former co-host of Steve Bannon's War Room podcast, which is carried on the Real America's Voice cable network. Maxey gave a copy of the hard drive to the Daily Mail, which is a UK newspaper, and the Daily Mail has been reporting on this pretty steadily since last spring of 2021. But again, the corporate media here in the U.S. only acknowledged its existence 3 weeks ago. So what has changed? Why has, and by the way, Maxey, fearing for his security, has fled to Switzerland, where he's working with IT experts to get more information off the laptop. Apparently, according to Maxey, there's something like 80,000 images and videos and 120,000 archived emails that were erased, but not really erased You can erase things from your hard drive, but they're still retrievable if you know what you're doing. And something like, how many gigs of data did he say was on here? It's a lot of data. It's more data than Sharon and I used to shoot 2 trips to Israel in 4K. So, yeah, a lot of images, a lot of video. And more of this will be coming out in the near future. But again, the question is, whenever you see anything in the corporate media, is the story true? And who benefits if I believe it? So, is the story true? Well, yes, the story is true. Who benefits if I believe it? I mean, clearly, the corporate media in the United States sat on the story prior to the election, the presidential election in 2020, because they didn't want Biden to lose. They wanted Trump to win. Surveys after the election showed that had more people in swing states been aware of the Hunter Biden laptop and the references to the big guy, Joe Biden, Biden would have lost. Donald Trump would have won a second term. So why is the corporate media now admitting what they should have acknowledged 18 months ago? I think the scenario that's playing out is this. I think that we were those of us who speculated that Joe Biden would serve no more than 2 years were correct. I think the go sign has been given to the media to get rid of Joe, and I'm going to predict now that we will see President Kamala Harris, or perhaps a new vice president and then Joe Biden taken down very, very soon. Biden is a liability coming into the midterm elections. Whether this happens before the midterms or not, I don't know. But I do not think Joe Biden will serve out a full term as president of the United States. Now, whether that means we wind up with President Harris or not, I don't know. Survey after survey shows that the American public even less impressed with Kamala Harris than with Joe Biden, if that were possible. Democrats painted themselves into a corner. They were so desperate for anybody but Trump. Well, that's what they got, was anybody but Trump. Our schedule for the rest of this year is changing just a bit. Of course, you know the Skywatch TV Defender Conference, the virtual conference, launches May 13th. That's just a month away now. But through next week Friday, or this coming Friday, actually the 15th, you can still save $10 on the registration. Normally $95, it'll be $85 through this coming Friday. Next Saturday, or this coming Saturday, April 16th of 2022, the price goes up to $95. More than 2 dozen presentations from the likes of Tom Horn, Jonathan Cahn, Joel Richardson, Carl Gallups, many others will be available for 90 days beginning May 13th, 12:01 a.m. Central Time here in the U.S. Central Time Zone. That's UTC -5. You set the schedule for 90 days. Watch what you want, when you want, when you're available, rather than having to sit and be there on schedule when the presentations roll out. You find out more online at defenderconference.com. That's also where you click the link to sign up, defenderconference.com. The following week, so we're just a little over a month away from this conference too. We're going to be back in Colorado Springs for a Prophecy Watchers conference, which is cool. Have not been there for 3-4 years? It's been a while since the last Prophecy Watchers conference at the Colorado Springs Marriott. This is May 19th through 22nd. Prophecy Watchers hosting what will probably be, in terms of number of speakers and number of attendees, the biggest prophecy conference of the year. Gary Stearman will be there, Mondo Gonzalez, and the other speakers. This is an all-star lineup. And I hesitate using that term in this context because I don't think any of these speakers, certainly Sharon and me, are not doing this to glorify ourselves. This is all about sharing the excitement that we see in the Word of God about how this story ends. You know, the human history, which is his story, finally plays out. L.A. Marzulli, Dr. Ken Johnson, Ryan Pitterson, Dr. Tommy Ice, Bill Salas, Brandon Holthouse, Brent Miller Jr., Doug Woodward, Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, and of course Sharon and I will be there as well, and we hope to see you there. Find out more online, and you can sign up at prophecywatchers.com, prophecywatchers.com. In July, the Southwest Radio Church Conference at the Ark Encounter has been canceled. We were just notified of this yesterday, sadly. sorry about that, because that looked to be a wonderful place to hold a conference, the Ark Encounter in Williamstown, Kentucky. If you've not been there, you really should go visit it at least once. The size of the boat, when you begin to, 300 cubits by what, okay, could they really fit all those animals in that? Yeah, when you see that boat, you realize, yeah, they really could fit all those animals in there. So anyway, sadly, the Southwest Radio Church Conference at the Ark Encounter has been canceled. They do have other conferences scheduled across the country. They're doing smaller regional conferences this year. You can find out all of that information at their website, swrc.com. The Go Therefore Conference, that is on. That'll be July 29th through 31st at the Harvest Revival Center in Brookville, Ohio. That's just outside Dayton. Sharon and I will be there with Pastor Mike Spalding, Pastor Carl Gallops, Dr. Michael Lake, David Heavener, Pastor Casper McLeod, Coach Dave Daubenmeier, Kenny C., Tom Dunn. This is a gathering of some really good friends. So we're looking forward to that one, to be a part of this gathering. The Go Therefore Conference, July 29th through 31st of 2022. GoThereforeConference.com. GoThereforeConference.com. In September, just accepted an invitation today. Don't even have details on this yet, but mid-September, we will be in Mid-Cal. We'll be coming to an area near Sacramento. Just kind of file that away, and we'll tell you more about that as information comes available. But mid-September, we'll be in California in the Sacramento area, and looking forward to that one. I know a couple of the other speakers will be guys that you will want to see and hear. Then in October, we head for Turkey. Sharon and I leading the Skywatch TV tour of Turkey, along with Doug Hershey, author of the best-selling books Israel Rising and Jerusalem Rising. That's October 18th through November 3rd. Join us there and see the cities of the churches of Revelation, Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest religious center, the Asclepion of Pergamum. This was a healing site devoted to the demigod son of Apollo, Asclepius. It wasn't really called Asclepius, and if he was a demigod, he lived in the pre-flood era, but it has some bearing on the letter that Jesus dictated to John for the angel of the church of Pergamum, which, of course, as you know, was the city where he said Satan dwells. So we'll talk about that. That's the whole point of this, historic and prophetic significance in Turkey. We'll visit Abraham's hometown of Haran and see some really other interesting sites. Çatalhöyük, Göbekli Tepe, well, I mentioned that already. Hattusha, the capital city of the Hittite Empire. And one of the roots of transmission, in our view, of the religious practices that came from Mesopotamia to the Greek and Roman world, and from there on to the West. October 18th through November 3rd, 2022. This will be a relatively small tour, a couple dozen at most. Want to find out more? There's an itinerary online and a breakdown of costs at skywatchinturkey.com, skywatchinturkey.com. And the next spring, we'll be back in Israel, March 19th through 30th of 2023. Sharon and me, alongside Allie Henson and Donna Howell from Skywatch TV, and Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat joining us as well. Again, an itinerary is online, breakdown of costs, and a place to reserve your spot on that tour at skywatchinisrael.com, skywatchinisrael.com. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to view or listen to this podcast wherever you're consuming it, whether it's YouTube, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, wherever else fine podcasts are sold. And we appreciate you giving us a like at our Facebook page. Our announcer is D.C. Good, and A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.